think my personal favorite, that's engagement. So what that does is that it provides these different features that you can leverage in your application to monitor or to rather engage with your target audience, right? So from this, the most important is obviously cloud messaging and in-app messaging. Cloud messaging is basically used for Firebase cloud messaging service, the push notifications that you see. So if, for instance, you have developed an application and you want to notify your users that, hey, um, people in the age group of 16 to 18, if they sign up right now or if they verify their email address, they'll be getting this new feature, or maybe they'll be getting this access to this discount or whatever, right? So you can engage with your target audience like that. Okay? So over here, you can see that I have four green boxes on the screen, and they're basically to show you that even when you're starting off with Firebase and Flutter, or in fact in any technology per se, you don't exactly need to use each and every single thing that's mentioned here, okay? The things that I've highlighted in green are pretty much all you need to leverage in order to create your market ready application. And yeah, so among that, we usually have authentication, either one of the database, whether you're using Firestore or the real-time database, you don't need to use both of them naturally. Um, Storage, cloud functions, sometimes you might want to use cloud functions, but it's not a must use, right? Okay. And then Crashlytics, it's completely up to you. It's optional. Analytics, it's up to you. And cloud messaging is also, it's up to you if you want to enhance your user engagement, right? But primarily it's authentication, Firestore, and storage, right? And even storage is optional in some applications where you don't need to deal with media uploads. So let's look into them one by one. The first and foremost, my personal favorite, is Firebase authentication. Now, Firebase authentication provides you so many options that you can choose from. So it provides the basic email password authentication. It provides phone authentication. So if you just want your users to be able to log in using a phone number upon which they would get an OTP, and then they would enter that OTP, and then you only want that user to be registered or that user to be logged in, phone login comes in handy at that time. Then we have Google sites. We have all different kinds of social logins, such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, and even Apple. And there are so many other different services also that you can see right here. Now, the interesting thing is this, that in one of our applications that we developed and released a couple of months ago, so over there we used multiple social logins, right? So you could either log in via Gmail or you could either log in via Facebook, right? And when we published our application to the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, it was fine with Google Play Store. But Apple App Store, it has actually revised their publishing guidelines just last year. And it was their requirement that if your app is using social logins, then make sure you have to use Apple login as well, right? And trust me, it wasn't even that difficult to implement Apple login, right? In Firebase, especially in Flutter Fire, everything is so well documented that you just have to type in Apple login Flutter Fire. It would take you to that documentation. You would copy paste that code, and that's pretty much it. So we were up and running with Apple login in like 10 minutes. So it was that fast, right? And then secondly, it's not just that you can just log in with one service provider. Okay, if you are logging in with a specific service provider and you want to be able to link another service provider to the one that you're currently logged in with, you can do that with Firebase. Now, where does this come in handy? So let's say you're logging in via email password or some social login, let's say Facebook or Gmail, right? But your application has this functionality that requires the users to enter their phone numbers and also verify them, right? So let's say without verifying their phone numbers, they can't create an order if it's an e-commerce application, right? In order to do that, you can just simply link up the phone service provider with your current credentials provider, right? And it's actually pretty simple, pretty easy. It's just one line of code for linking the two up together. So that way you would primarily be signing in with your Facebook account or Gmail account or whatever that you're currently logged in with. And your phone number is just something extra that's linked to your credential, right? So this provides added security and it provides really high level functionality that you can then integrate in your application. Now, when we talk about database, I did mention that Firebase has two types of databases. It has Firestore and it has the real-time database. Firestore came in a couple of years ago, and initially it just had real-time database, right? So what's the similarities between the two? What are the differences? Let's look into that. So first and foremost, the Cloud Firestore and the real-time database, they're both NoSQL databases, right? So if you're familiar with SQL, you would kind of get what I'm trying to say here. But if you're not, let me tell you. When you're working with SQL databases, you have to create your entire schema. You have to create your tables. You have to basically write those complicated queries that take care of all that stuff, right? In Firestore or in the real-time database, you don't need to do that, right? It's a NoSQL database. That means you don't really have to create a specific or a concrete schema to get started with. You don't need to create any tables. You just really have to interact with data. And there are certain functions in Firebase that if, for instance, you're creating a record in a collection, right? Collection is the equivalent of an SQL table, you could say. Okay? So let's say if you're creating a document, a record in a collection on Firebase, that collection does not exist at the moment. So what Firebase will do is that it will first create it for you, and then it will write your data over there, right? So you don't have to worry about like, oh my God, what if I mess up? What if this collection does not exist? What if this field does not exist? What if I'm unable to provide this specific attribute at this point in time? Will my code break? Will my database break? Will things malfunction? These are the things that you don't need to worry about when you're dealing with Firebase, whether it's Firestore or the real-time database. So that's one major upgrade from SQL databases, right? So in Cloud Firestore, data is stored in documents and documents are stored in collections. In terms of SQL, collections are tables and documents are rows or individual records, right? There's hierarchical data in the sense that you first have a collection. I think I have an image right here. Okay, so this is what the interface of Firestore looks like, right? We first have collections on the root. You can have as many collections as you want. Then within a collection, you have multiple documents, right? So this document that you see over here right now, this is just one document. If you were to have 100 documents in, let's say, this collection called newsfeed, then you would be having 10 different IDs over here, right? And obviously documents are stored or indexed by their keys. Now that's up to you whether you want to provide a custom key yourself. And other than that, if you don't want to do that, Firebase actually auto creates keys for documents itself if you don't provide your own keys or your own IDs, right? So that's the thing. So we have the collection. Inside the collection, we have multiple documents. Then one document looks like this. If you've worked with JSON before, this is exactly JSON, right? So you have all your attributes over here, and in terms of SQL, all your columns over here, right? So what attributes does it support? Pretty much everything. integers, doubles, strings, um, booleans, timestamps, arrays, maps, all that different stuff, right? It provides all of that stuff. So basically, any kind of JSON that you want, right? And above that, you would also see that there's this document. It has this field written over here, and it has this collection written over here. This is where hierarchical data comes in. So this means that a document can have a sub-collection, which can then have documents, which can then have sub-collections, and so on and so forth, right? So that actually enables you to maintain a specific hierarchy of data if and where you need to use it. Other than that, there's really excellent offline support provided by Firestore by default for currently Android, iOS, and web. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that if you have integrated Firestore in an application, okay, and naturally, in order to interact with your cloud databases, you need an internet connection, right? So the internet's working fine. You're scrolling, you're interacting with the application and all that stuff, right? And then let's say the internet stops working. Now, when you reopen the application, you would still be able to use it partially, as you can partially use normal applications like Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't know about Facebook. I've been deactivated for a while now. So on Twitter and on LinkedIn, what you would have noticed is that when there is no internet connectivity, you cannot you can see some of the images, not all of them, and in some cases you can see images or media at all. But what you can see is text-based content. Right? You can still see what people have posted. You can still access different sections of the application and yada yada yada, right? This is exactly what Firestore provides you by default under the offline support, right? So if your device were to be cut off from the internet, and you would be using that, and you're just using your application again, so you would notice that the images might not be visible, but the text-based content will still be available and visible to you. So that really enhances the user experience, right? Other than that, when we're talking about queries in Flutter, queries in Firestore. So Firestore queries provide a lot of things, right? It provides filtering, it provides sorting, it provides chaining. When I say chaining, I mean you can combine multiple queries, multiple conditions all together to form this huge complex query. You can do that in Firestore. And what do the queries return? A query can either return a single document or it can return you multiple documents, right? So we'll be looking into it later on when we look at the demo application. Now, in contrast, the real-time database data is stored in one large JSON tree. Okay, so it's not hierarchical as we just saw in Firestore. Rather, it's kind of like this. It kind of looks like a document. In fact, not even a document. It's just this big JSON tree. That's it. That's all you need to know. So what it has here is that the different collections that we were referring to earlier, we have them as the roots or the subroots in the tree. So we have one for orders here, then we have products, user data, and all that stuff, right? And then similarly, you have your records inside them, right? Also, they're also indexed by their IDs, unique identifiers, and it's up to you. If you want to provide a custom ID, you can do that. If you don't want to do that, then Firebase will create, in fact, auto-generate IDs for you, right? So as you can see, data is not exactly hierarchical there, right? It's kind of a little bit tricky to manipulate with or interact with, all right? Currently, a real-time database provides offline support for Android and iOS only, so web is not included. The queries are deep and hierarchical, and they return the basically entire subtree. So basically the thing that you need to know and the thing that you need to understand is that even though Firebase is providing two different kinds of databases, you need to know when to use which one, right? So, for instance, if you're working on an application that does nothing but it's a real-time application, right? You for that you would be using real-time database as the name suggests, right? Because that way you don't need to provide such custom or complex queries. You just basically need to interact with the data in a way that when as and when it's updated there on the database, the same changes are reflected there right there in your application, right? So that's where real-time database comes in handy. Firestore, on the other hand, comes in handy for all use cases except real-time applications. So whether you're creating an application for an e-commerce store, or you're basically creating any kind of application, even if you're creating a game and you obviously want to include some online elements such as player pairing and all that stuff, you can easily do that with Firestore. In fact, you can pretty much do anything with Firestore, as that's the latest database in Firebase by Google, right? So next up, we have Firebase Cloud Messaging Service, aka push notifications. So what is this? This is a service for dispatching real-time notifications, and by default, in fact, not by default, it actually it kind of provides user engagement and retention if you want to send specific notifications to specific people only. You can do that using FCM, right? A good example over here would be, for instance, Reddit. So in Reddit, there are multiple subreddits, right? And a user can be subscribed to any subreddits, right? Now, if you want a notification to be dispatched to a user who is subscribed to, let's say, subreddit called memes, then only the users from that subreddit will be getting that notification, not the other ones, right? So that's it kind of paves the way for target audience and user engagement, right? By default, it can carry up to 4 kilobytes of payload, and you can even customize them in the sense that what would happen if the user taps on a notification from the notification panel, right? Which screen would he be led to? What would be the basically what action would follow, right? You can control all of that. You can customize the routings. You can do pretty much anything and everything. All right. So that's pretty. It comes in pretty handy. You could either dispatch FCM manually using Firebase Console, or you could automate that using Cloud Functions. What are Cloud Functions? Cloud Functions are functions that are triggered by an event. So let's say if the subreddit called memes just had a new post added to it, then that would trigger a cloud function which is listening to that event, and that would dispatch a notification to the users. All right. So that's basically how cloud functions work. Now, cloud functions are not just responsible for triggering notifications. You can pretty much do anything and everything with cloud functions. If let's say cloud functions can trigger notifications, cloud functions can make database changes. So for instance, it's listening to a specific part in the database, it gets that event, it processes, or in fact, it executes that function, and then it makes some changes to the database again. So cloud functions are pretty much useful, and they can come in handy in any facet of development. Even if you're writing REST APIs, when you want to interact with your custom databases. So let's say you're not using Firebase database, but rather you're using MongoDB, or you're using AWS, or just something else, right? Then Cloud Functions will actually bridge that connection between the two if you want that. Now we have Crashlytics. Crashlytics, like I told you, it enables you to monitor the all of the crash events of your application. And when I say that, it actually provides a complete set of logs that come in super handy. So it provides you, okay, this this crash occurred on this date, on this time. This was the platform. This was the OS number. This was the. I think in some cases it even provides, no. In fact, it always provides device names as well. So in case if your application is behaving on just one specific phone, which we have personally experienced way back when Huawei came out, and there was this huge that Huawei is getting off Play Store and they're building their custom services and everything. We encountered some app crashes there on Huawei devices specifically. So it really comes in handy where it provides all of this information by default. So you don't really have to do much at your end. You just have to write, in fact, yeah, you just have to write an import for Crashlytics, and that's pretty much it. And it would actually provide you all of the reporting for all of the crash events that are happening in your application. Aside from device level information, it will also provide you app level information. So let's say that the crash occurred in this class, in this method, on this line, and this was the exception that was uncaught, which basically resulted in your app crashing. So it provides all of that stuff, right? Now, the reason why I really like Firebase Crashlytics is that I've personally experienced it, and I've personally leveraged it in a very funny situation, right? So a couple of years ago, we had developed this application, right? And we had launched it on Play Store, right? Now, the application at that point in time, it was still in beta testing, right? So our primary stakeholder, our client, they were testing it with a small segment of the users, right? Now, coincidentally, or rather unfortunately, the laptop that we were using for the development of this application, all of the USB ports over there were fried. Okay, so they would not detect when I would plug in a USB cable, which would not allow me to basically debug my application on my physical device, right? And the application was of the nature that it could not be debugged in an emulator, right? Because it was a real time application. It was interacting with locations and all different stuff, right? So naturally, I needed a physical device, and my USB ports had just given up on me. And I couldn't even resort to wireless debugging because for that, it was asking me to connect to my USB cable because it needed to detect it at least once before, setting things up. So we couldn't do all of that. So what I did was that we enabled Crashlytics in that application. It was a native Android application, just by the way. Flutter had not come out at that time. So we enabled Crashlytics in our application, and that's it. Every time our app would crash or malfunction, we would get an email. We would get all of these logs on Crashlytics, and I could literally debug my application from Firebase, right? And that's how I pretty much resolved all of these issues that were happening, right? So if you know how to use Crashlytics, it could be a major game changer for you, seriously. Then naturally we have analytics. So initially I was telling that analytics provides certain things. It provides, by default, it provides some data that you can look at. So for instance, it provides that, okay, so this is the percentage of your target audience or your target or your users that are using this application. These are the females, these are the males. You have these many people coming in from the US, these many people coming in from Singapore, from Pakistan, all these different regions. Daily, it would even provide you retention metrics, as in how many new users you have gotten over, let's say, a week or in a specific day, then how many users stayed, how many users are engaging or rather using your application on a daily basis. And these are just some of the very basic things that it provides you by default, right? So if you were to actually include or in fact enable analytics in one of your applications, you would be able to see that it provides much more than what I've actually just told you. And then on top of that, you can even customize what filters it needs to reflect in the dashboard. Now, the question would be, wow, all of that sounds too good to be true. And does that mean that it's really code intensive? And the good news is it's actually not. It's pretty simple code. There's less code. And the best part is that in Flutter everything's documented really well. So obviously, the last thing that you might be wondering is what kind of applications can you actually build with the both of them combined, that is Flutter and Firebase. So my answer to you would be pretty much anything and everything, from your standard e-commerce applications to chatbots to chat applications to games, pretty much literally anything, whether you're developing it for a single user or whether you're developing it, sorry, not a single user, whether you're developing it for a small business, whether you're developing it for a big, large organization, you can do pretty much anything with the two of them combined, provided that you know how to use them, right? So now we will actually be looking at this demo application that I've coded just for this session so that we can demonstrate how you can use the Flutter Fire plugins with an existing Flutter application, right? So the first thing that you need to know is that Flutter Fire, like I have been saying for a while now, it's it's the official name given to Firebase packages for Flutter, right? So whatever you need to know about Flutter Fire, whether it's related to authentication, whether it's related to databases, queries, storage, analytics, pretty much anything and everything, you will be able to find all of that information on this URL right here. So if you just type in Flutterfire on Google, this would probably be the first or the second link, and you would click on that, and this would lead you to this tab where it would be showing you that we currently have all of these different APIs, plugins, dependencies, and you can use them. And how you can use them, it would be telling you all. It basically documents everything from integration to usage to monitoring everything, right? So yeah, that's when you want to integrate. In fact, let's just dive right into our code. Just give me a sec. Let me increase the font size. Okay. Okay, I think I have my emulator here. Okay, cool. All right, so before I actually build the application, let me quickly walk you guys through the setup of Firebase and basically how things work, right? Now, in order to save time, I already have a bunch of things already done here, but let me quickly walk you through everything, right? So the first and foremost, what you need to do is that you need to create a Firebase project and you need to create a Flutter project, right? Now, I'm assuming that you already have an application up and running on Flutter in the sense that you have coded everything statically from the UI and from the flow point of view, right? Now, you just need to interact with a live database service, or you just need to, let's say, just integrate authentication, right? So for that, you need to first and foremost create a project on Firebase. For the sake of demonstration, I already have this project created on Firebase, but for everyone who's not that familiar with it, let me quickly walk you through that. So what you need to do first and foremost is just type in Firebase console, and you would get this link right here, okay? You would be heading on over here, And this would open up an interface like this, where it would be showing you all of the past projects that if you've created previously and all that different stuff, right? Now, in order to create a new project, you would be clicking on creating a new project. And over here, you would be writing your project's name. So let's say Funky Flutter. This is the ID that it would auto-generate for you, and you can customize it yourself if you want to. I don't need to do that, so let's leave it at that. Then you would be clicking on continue, and over here it would say that it would ask you, do you want to enable Google Analytics for this Firebase project or not? And if you would enable analytics, these are all the things that you would actually be unlocking, right? But right now, I'm going to disable that because on this email address, I don't really have an analytics account right now, okay? And you can enable analytics later on at any point in time, okay? No issues, it's just part of the setup that they have, that they've added, okay? So you click on create project and it would create this project for you. It would take about 10 seconds to get everything right up and running. And after that, you will be able to access all of those sections that we were looking at right now in our talk, okay? So as you can see, it has already created this project for us, and I hit continue, and this is what you would essentially be looking at when you create a Firebase project for the first time, right? Now here you can see add an app to get started, right? So basically you can add any kind of application on Firebase. So if you're working on native Android, you would obviously be clicking on Android. If it's native iOS, clicking on iOS. Even if you're working on Flutter, you would still be doing it one by one for each of the platforms that you're coding your application for. So if I'm building it for Android and iOS using Flutter, then these are the things that I would need to set up in order to proceed, right? Now, in order to add an Android application to your Firebase project, you need your Android package name. Now, if you're unaware as to where you can get this package name from, you can actually get it from your manifest file or from your Gradle file. It's the same, okay? So what you need to do is that you need to head over to this directory called Android, and under that you would head over to app, then you would head over to source, and then main, and then there we go, manifest, okay? So over here you can see that this manifest file, it has this package ID over here, okay? So the project that I've already set up is using this package ID. So obviously I'm not going to repeat the process because I already have things set up, but this is where you would essentially be getting your package ID from in order to link it to the Firebase project that you've already created. So this is where your package name goes. So let's say funky Flutter, okay? And this is optional if you want to provide a nickname or not. It's entirely up to you. I don't usually do that. And then the debug SHA is also optional, okay? Now, when would you actually need to provide a debug SHA-1 certificate? You would actually need to do that when you're working with phone login, with Gmail login. Whenever you're working with services like these, you need to include your debug SHA-1. This is just for Android, okay? It's not for iOS, right? So I'm just going to hit register. Obviously, we won't be using this Firebase project. It's just for the sake of showing you guys what steps you need to follow in order to link up the two, right? Now, so basically, essentially, the bare minimum required to link up your Flutter project with a Firebase project is that you provide your package ID. The next thing that it would do is that it would provide you this Google services.json file, which you then need to copy paste in your Android application, right? So as you can see over here, it says that you need to move the Google services.json file in the app module in Android's root directory. Okay? So when you would download this file, I'm not downloading it again, you would actually need to move it over here, right? So if I were just to collapse main, you would be able to see that, okay, Google services.json needs to be directly located under the source directory, okay? And please keep in mind that if you have accidentally downloaded more than one Google Services JSON file, or it may happen in many cases that that this is, for instance, your nth project, and you currently, or in fact, you previously have 4 different Google Services JSON files already downloaded in the same directory, then please make sure that when you're pasting that JSON file for this project, you do that without the name, without the number that appears inside the bracket, okay? Because the reason for this is that when you're setting up Firebase, by copy pasting this file and writing those integration lines, those imports and dependencies, then when you're actually building your project, Google is looking for a file name called google-services.json specifically. It does not know google-services bracket 1.json. It does not know all of that. And if you have that pasted, it will throw you an error. So please be mindful that you need to just paste it in the exact same format, right? And obviously, the second important thing is that every Firebase project has a unique Google Services.json. So if you generated or if you downloaded a Google Services JSON file from another Firebase project, then you cannot use that in this project. It will throw you an error because this package ID is different, that package ID is different. So obviously it's a mismatch, right? The next thing that you would do after copy pasting this services file is that you get these 2 blocks of code over here, right? So what you actually need to do here is this. Over here, it's written at this line, and it provides this Google-services line that you need to include in your Gradle file. Now, Android has 2 levels of Gradle files. One is the project level Gradle file, and the other is application level Gradle file. This line that you need to include over here, it's written that you need to do so in this project level build.gradle. Now, where is this exactly located? It's located right here. It's located right under Android. So if you were to click on that, build.gradle, this kind of file would open for you, and you can see that I already have this added under the dependency section, right where it asked me to do that. Okay, so we have build script, dependencies, and then we need to add this line. We have build script, dependencies, and then we need to add this line. Okay, so that's the second step. The last step almost is that you need to include this line, Google-services line, inside your app level Gradle file. And this time it's not going to be under the dependency section. Rather, it's going to be in the app level Gradle file, which is located under the application directory, right? So if you expand app, you can see this build.gradle file over here, and you will see that I have added this right at the bottom of my file, okay? So it's entirely up to you whether you want to add this on top somewhere in between where it says com.android application. You can add your plugin line over here, but I've added it at the end of my file, so it doesn't really make much of a difference, and you can add it pretty much anywhere, right? As long as it's in its proper place, right? And once you've done that, you hit next, and then you continue to the console, and that's it. That's your Android all linked and ready to go. Now, if we are talking about iOS, even though like I'm currently on from my Windows laptop, I'm not really logged in from MacBook right now, so I can demonstrate to you iOS integrations right now. But basically, and this is kind of like a really important thing to remember, especially for beginners, because they often tend to get this question, right? Can we integrate Firebase in an iOS application using our Windows laptop or using a Windows machine? The answer is you can't. Okay. The reason being that you need Xcode in order to be able to properly integrate Firebase in your application. Because what this would mean is that you basically, just like we did in Android right now, you need to provide your iOS bundle ID, which you can get from, I think it's there in your info.plist file or just anywhere. And it's basically there in your Xcode inside the runner folder. It's just the first thing that you would see in Xcode. Okay. So it's the same thing as the package names, just named differently. So let's just type in funky Flutter. Again, the app nickname is optional and the App Store ID is also optional. And as you can see, you don't really need to provide your SHA-1 certificates or any sort of thing over here, right? The next thing that it would provide you is that it would provide you with this Google service-info.plist file, which you need to add under your application directory or in your runner folder, right? And this is where MacBook and this is where Xcode per se come in, because you can do that directly from your Windows machine, right? I mean, so to speak, you can easily open up your project. It has all those folders. Like, let me just show you. So we have iOS over here, and we have runner over here, and yeah, we basically that's where we have everything, right? So this is where you need to paste your info.plist file, right? But you can paste it directly from here. You need Xcode to do that. Why? Because when you're pasting this plist file, Xcode does some implicit configurations on its own, and it's just something that you cannot do using a Windows machine. Whether you're using VS Code or Android Studio, you just can't, right? So whether you would need a MacBook or you would need a VM machine, virtual machine with iOS setup, until and unless you don't have any one of those, you can't really work on your iOS application in Flutter if you're working with Firebase, right? Or in fact, even if you're just working on the iOS side of things in your application, because at the end of the day, you still need to create a build and you need to be able to release it on the App Store. There are certain workarounds, certain online workarounds, cloud-based workarounds that still enable you to create builds and stuff like that. But if you want to do it properly, then I would recommend that you either invest in a MacBook if you don't already have one, or just bear with the virtual machine, right? And that's pretty much it that you need to do. And after that, you just need to run pod install in your terminal. And you don't really need to add in any of this initialization code. It's for native iOS, you definitely need to do that. But for Flutter side of things, you don't really need to do that. So the only thing that you need to do is obviously include the plist file, run pod install, and just add in the Flutterfire dependencies in your pubspec.yaml, but that's part of your Flutter project. It's not something that you would need to make changes to your native iOS side of things, right? So for iOS, it's a relatively shorter step up setup than it is for Android in Flutter, okay? So once you have done all that stuff, your iOS will be linked up over here, and then you can use pretty much anything from this section. Now I'm just going to close this because we already have this project up and running. Now, currently what you see over here is Cloud Firestore. This is the real-time database that I was talking about, but we're not going to be using that. We'll be using the simple Cloud Firestore database, right? Then by default, if you would be creating your Firestore database, it would ask whether you want to start with test mode or production mode, right? So it's entirely up to you. What the test mode does is that it writes this default rule that this database is only accessible until this date, which is the 30th of March, one month from now, right? So that's just the test version, okay? It comes in pretty much handy when you don't want to use, or whether you don't want to set up custom rules as of now. You just want to set things up, you want to play with things, and you just want to get things working, up and running. And then you just want to set your security rules right towards the end, right? By security rules, I mean it's completely entirely up to you what kind of rules you want to set. So, for instance, you want only logged in or authenticated users to be able to access the database. Then you would be writing a rule like allow read and write only if auth.id or auth.uid is not equal to null. That would imply that document reads and writes apply to to just the authenticated users only. So this rule that you see over here, it actually applies to the entire Firestore database that we have. If you want different sets of rules for different collections, so for instance, you have a collection which should be accessible to public, and by public I mean that you don't really need to be authenticated in order to access that collection. You can do that, right? If, let's say, you want to restrict reads and writes to just a specific collection, you can do that. You can specify the collection's name, and then you can do that, and so on and so forth. All right. So basically, if you want to look up more on the rules that you can set up in Firebase, you can actually Google them and just look at them at your own convenience. The different kinds of rules that are supported that you can basically write, ranging from the most basic rules to really advanced rules. So let's say Flutter. Oh, sorry. Firebase security rules. And you can actually head over to their official documentation, where it would provide you a whole bunch of different rules along with explanations as to what it actually means, right? Okay, so back to our project. Okay. So right now, I currently have this project set up in test mode, as in I haven't really provided any custom rules right now, right? So this is what our database looks like right now. This is a write-ups collection. These are my documents, and this is content of a specific document, just as we were seeing previously. So, right. Oh, and another thing that I would like to mention is that obviously when you're done integrating all those setup steps that we just went through with regards to Firebase integration in your Flutter application, and the last thing obviously is that you need to include the Flutter Fire dependencies in your pubspec.yaml. Okay, you can get them from Flutterfire, you can get them from pub.dev. It's entirely up to you. All right. So once you have all of these things done and you build your project on Android, you will most likely encounter an error. Okay. The error could be of two types. One, you could get an error pertaining to Android X compatibility, because Firebase has been constantly upgrading and updating. It now requires that your Android project, for your Android project, you're using Android X in comparison to Android, which is the older convention, right? So by default now, the IDs, whenever you're creating a Flutter project, it actually asks if you want to enable Android X. And a good choice is to obviously enable that by default. But if in case you haven't and you run into Android X errors on the go, then you can just Google them, and there's just like 3 to 4 lines of code that you need to write in a specific file that would actually get rid of those errors for you. The second error, which is more likely, in fact, which is most likely to come, is something pertaining to multi-text, right? So I think I have that over here. I don't. Okay. So basically, if I were to remove this right now, just give me a sec. Okay, so I currently have multi-text enabled true, but let me quickly remove that and try building my application. So while the application is building, basically what is multi-text? It's a convention, or it's something provided by Android, which enables when you're including additional dependencies or third-party dependencies, right? Then Android has a certain code limit that those dependencies should be able to fit into these lines of code or into these bytes worth of code, right? If it overflows, it throws you an error, something like that. Code could not be fit into text file or something like that. Right? So that's pertaining to multi-text. So if you run into this error, you can just simply Google it, and for in order to get rid of this error, you just need to include two lines of code in your app level Gradle file, and when you do that, you'll obviously get rid of those errors. So, and we have it. Okay, so as you can see, build failed, and what's the reason? Merge dex debug. The number of method references in a text file cannot exceed 64K, right? So that means that we have exhausted our limit and we need to enable multiplexing. So you just need to Google this right away. And and you'll probably get the answer in the first link that pops up. And over here, it says that you need to enable multi-text. So you need to open up your app level build.gradle file, and you need to enable multi-text under default config by writing multi-text enabled true. And the second thing that you need to do is that you need to copy paste this line of code in your dependency section. But obviously, don't do anything just blindly. Always read what the answer actually says. And over here, it says that by default, you would need to copy paste this line of code. But if you already have migrated to Android X, then you need to copy paste this one. Okay. So that's what I had initially done. And I just commented it out just to show you guys, because this is an error that everybody gets when they're just starting off with Firebase and Flutter. I think it even happens in native Android. So yeah, it's just something that you need to enable. Okay. So while this application is building, let me just give you guys a context of what kind of application this is. Um, okay. So basically, it's a pen pal application. If you don't know what pen pal means, it's an English word which means friends who communicate with each other by writing letters or just something in written. Okay, so that's the original meaning of it. But the concept of this application is that you're able to write anything that you want, and you're able to share that with others. Okay, so the inspiration behind this application is pretty much my passion for writing. I am absolutely passionate about writing, and by writing, I don't exactly mean technical blogs. Of course, I do that, but other than that, actual writing, like poems, snippets, haikus, stuff like that. Okay? And what I have always been looking for is that I want to be able to share my write ups with people. And sometimes I want to be acknowledged for them. For, let's say, I want people to know that, okay, I'm the person who has written this thing. But other times, I don't really want any kind of acknowledgement. I just want to put it out there as an anonymous writer. Okay, so that's the purpose of this application. We already have a bunch of queries set up due to time shortage and stuff like that. We would probably be doing a few additional queries. We'll be doing that over here. Like, I'll be coding them with you. Uh, Initially, I had a lot of things planned, but due to technical difficulties, obviously, we have to change our strategy a little bit. But rest assured, after this session is done, I will be uploading this on GitHub, and I'll be sharing the repo link with the organizers, and you can actually download this, or you can actually clone this from GitHub later on and look into the actual code yourself and even play with different functionalities. Okay. So what we currently have is we have this home screen where we're getting all different kinds of write-ups, right? In a staggered grid view. Then we have a profile screen as well, which does pretty much the same thing, except that the intention is that on this tab, we're only able to see write-ups that have been created by us in comparison to so many write-ups that are currently there on the database, right? And the intention of the home screen is obviously that we're able to get all of the write-ups that are currently there on the database, right? Then these are the two main screens, right? Then the next thing that we have is yeah, we have this logout button over here. Currently, this application does not have authentication enabled, neither integrated. So we'll see, we will try to get at least one simple form of authentication up and running so you guys can see how things work. Okay? Other than that, we also have this button over here, which is responsible for when you want to write something. So this part will actually be implementing the query over here that whenever you create a record and you hit submit, you will write a query which will then be executed when you tap submit. Okay, so what this will do is that it will populate your entry on the database. Okay, so this is kind of like the gist of it. We also have two extra screens in the beginning, such as the login and the sign up screen. We'll see if we have time for that, and we'll see if I have the stamina for that. If we do, then we'll be coding that as well. If not, no problems. I'll be sharing the complete repository with you guys after the session's done. Okay, so let's look at the code that we have right here right now. So as you can see, in my home screen, this is my home screen. Okay, I have a scaffold, app bar, nothing unusual. I have this floating action button, which takes me to my new write-up screen. I have all my routes set up in main.dart. Just collapse these things so that you guys can see it properly. Okay. Now, even though you guys can probably see a lot of files over here, right? But don't feel overwhelmed. It's actually a pretty simple application. So over here in our home screen, our body is wrapped inside a stream builder. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what a stream builder is, a stream builder is kind of like an active listener to the database. Okay, so let's say that I have written a query that's fetching which is fetching data from the database, right? So if you were to return a future, which would then mean that you would have to wrap your UI code inside a future builder, then that would mean that the query is executed just once. And if the database is modified by, let's say, another user using the application on their own device, then the UI will not be updated over here because it's not actively listening to the database for any changes, right? So that's what Stream Builder does. What it does is that it's actively listening to changes in the database, and the query is run just once. So let's say that if the query, when it runs for the first time, it returns 5 documents, right? And let's say that we have Louis or JJ who are using the application on their own devices, and let's say they create a new entry from their own account or from basically their own devices, right? So what it means is that the query will not be re-executed. In fact, it will just detect that, okay, there has been a change in this collection that we're actively listening to. There's an added document. Okay, let's trigger the UI and it will just rebuild that UI accordingly. Okay. So it's just that from the costing or from the pricing point of view, or from the most importantly, quotas point of view, this extra read this extra document that was added by Louis or JJ, this would be counted as one additional read instead of 6 reads. Okay, so the 5 reads that it fetched previously are already there, and it's just one extra document that it needs to handle, so it will be counted as one extra read. Okay, so that's how Stream Builder works. In comparison to that, we have the same thing, but it's a future builder on our profile screen. So even though the data in both of them, it looks exactly the same, and from an observer's point of view, you might say that it's literally the same thing. The intention was that I wanted you guys to know the difference between a stream builder and a future builder, because when you're building applications, you kind of need to use a mix and match of both, right? So on the home screen, we have our stream builder, and on our profile screen, we just have our future builder. So the future builder, as you can see, there's literally nothing different. It's just the query is different, the wrapper is different, obviously, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so yeah, that's how we're handling things, right? So we were looking at our stream builder. We have this stream. Inside stream, you need to define the query that needs to be executed. We'll be looking at our queries right now. Then we have the builder method. What the builder method is responsible is, it's basically responsible for rendering the UI when that query has executed. So whether that query's execution resulted in a success, whether it resulted in a failure, builder will be triggered, right? So over here, you need to basically handle multiple use cases, in the sense that if the data is, if some data was in fact returned, if it exists, then you actually need to render this actual UI that's intended for displaying that information. If not, then you perhaps need to return an error message like nothing was found. And if the query is currently being executed, right, then you would need to return some form of loader or indicator, which would give the impression that, okay, the application, there's something happening in the application, but it's taking time to load. Okay, so that's all there is to it. And similarly, and even in the profile section, we have the same thing. We have 3 use cases. If the data is there, then return the grid view. If it's not there, return this error. If it's currently loading, then just return this progress indicator. Okay, now let's look into our queries. Let's start with the simpler one first. So currently we have two queries, 2 read queries, okay? The first one is the get write-ups. And as you can see, I'm returning a future of list write-up over here. And before that, let's look into our write-up class, okay? So our services directory, it has multiple files such as auth for authentication related events and queries. DB is for strictly database related events and queries. Globals, it's just something that I make for static test data, stuff like that, and other configurations that need to be global across the entire project. Then we have models, and inside models, I currently have 2 kinds of classes. I've just coded this, but I haven't really integrated it. But what's integrated is this write-up class, okay? So every write-up has a unique ID. It has a title, it has a body, and it has a date created. This is the constructor for it, and this is a factory method that I have coded to deserialize results. Because when we're querying in Firebase, it returns results to us kind of like in a JSON format. So we obviously need to make that compatible with our custom classes that we have coded throughout our application, right? So you don't really need to do much. You just basically add this one extra deserialization method in your class. So what this is doing is that this name, it's not something built in, it's just something that I gave it. So it's my custom name that I gave it. I'm passing a document snapshot type in arguments, because that's what we'll be getting from our queries in Firebase, right? So this is one specific document that we'll be getting from our query. And what I've done is that I've created a map using dot.data. So if you hit Control Q over here, it would show you that document.data is basically of type map, and it basically contains all the data of this document snapshot. Okay, so I have first retrieved that and saved that in my data variable. And the reason for doing that is because I need its ID. Okay, now, the reason why I didn't do data bracket ID similar to how I did in title and body over here is because when you're writing to Firebase, even though it auto generates an ID for you, it would not append that ID inside your document per se. Now, even though when you do write something to the database and it it returns you this object. I think it returns you this metadata of this document that you've just added. And you can, so to speak, you can use that thing in order to append ID to that record that you just entered in the database, right? But that's not optimal because that would mean that for writing one document to the database, you're essentially doing two write queries, which is not optimal, okay? And there are better workarounds. So you don't exactly need to have an ID in your database. Like if you see over here, I just have title, date created, and body. I don't have ID. This is my ID. This is the actual document ID that I need in my project in order to uniquely identify them. Right? So instead of while we're writing to the database and writing another write query to just append a single field inside our document, instead of doing that, we're doing this, okay? So because due to our document snapshot, when we're reading from our database, because it's already returning this entire document, and when I say it's returning us a document, it's not just returning us these fields that you see over here. It's also returning this document ID, and it's returning a couple of other things as well, which we don't really need to use, but it's returning the document ID, so we'll just use it like this. So as you can see, I have access doc.id over here to save it in the ID attribute of my write-up class. And then after that, in order to set the data for the title and the body fields, I've accessed it like this, data bracket title. If this field actually exists in the document in question, then retrieve the value and save it in title. If it does not exist, then just save an empty string inside title. Okay. So this is all there is to deserialization. Back to our query. Right. So over here we have what are we basically doing? So first and foremost, we have created a single variable with to basically initialize Firestore so that we can interact with the Firestore database, right? You don't exactly need to do that. If you want, you can copy paste this everywhere where it says DB, but because that would make the code kind of long, you can just do that once on the top, right? Now, what we're doing is that we're accessing the collection first. So we're accessing the write-ups collection, and then we're ordering them by the date created. And then we're doing a get operation. And what the get operation does is that it basically returns a future containing this entire snapshot from when the query has been successfully executed. Okay, so get does exactly that. It basically fetches the documents for this query. Okay, so this is your query. This is where the query is being executed, and this is the callback that is triggered when the query has been executed successfully. There are actually 3 callbacks, not just in Firebase, but for any future type or for any REST API that you're consuming. The first is then, The second is when completed, and the third is on error or catch error. Okay, so mm, so to speak, on error or catch error, it's obviously triggered when there has been some kind of exception that you need to catch and then handle appropriately. When complete is basically a combination of the then callback plus the error callback, in the sense that you need to write that if the result was, if the query snapshot sorry, if the query snapshot is not null, then do this. If it's null, that means an error was caught. You need to catch that exception which was thrown, and then you need to either print it or handle it or just pretty much do whatever you want to do. But the most frequently callback that's actually used is the then callback, because this is triggered when your query has been executed successfully. Okay, so what we're doing here is that if you see the then callback, it's a function which is returning you something called query snapshot. Okay, so we have this query snapshot over here. This is the data that we have retrieved from our query. Now we need to manipulate this data in order to reflect that in our UI. So we have inside our method for the then callback, we first initialize and we first create and initialize this list of write-ups, and then we do that if the query snapshot size is greater than 0, then we were doing all of the deserialization. And how are we doing that? For every document that the query snapshot has returned, we are deserializing it to our custom class that we have coded, which is called write-up. So you can actually, I mean, it's kind of pretty self-explanatory, but as you can see over here that we're accessing all of the documents for the query snapshot. Here, for every document that we have, we're passing it to the from Firestore method that we created for deserialization. And it's basically converting this document snapshot to our custom class, which is write-up. Then we've called toList because it expects an iterable. Okay, so this is it. That's all you basically need to do in order to save that dynamic JSON data into your custom class object, which is write-ups. Okay, and then right at the end you have to return. Okay, now if we kind of synchronize this with our UI code over here, then we will be able to see that that's literally all that we're doing. Inside Future, we have called this query, which will return us a future of list of write-ups. And then inside our builder, we have a few conditions that we have coded. So we're checking into whether the connection state is done. If the connection state is done, meaning that the query has been executed, then we need to check whether the query returned some data or it didn't. Okay, so as you can see, if we expand this done over here, then you will be able to see that connection state.done actually means that it's connected to a terminated asynchronous computation. Now, so to speak, you don't exactly have to write in all of these checks. I mean, if you're just a beginner and you just want to get right into the gist of everything, in comparison to handling all of these different kinds of scenarios, then by all means, you just need to basically check whether a snapshot has data, and if it has data, then return this grid view. If it does not have data, then just return nothing was found. Okay. But we tend to obviously do that because we need to provide a better user experience. So what this implies is that this else check is basically under that the connection state is not done, meaning that the query is currently in the process of being executed. Okay. So while it's being executed, we just want to show that please wait, we're fetching the data, and here's an indicator. But once it has done executing it, whether it returned some documents or it didn't, that's where this thing comes in. So what we're doing here is that we're checking snapshot.hasData and snapshot.data is not empty, then obviously we return our grid view. Else we return this error message that nothing was found, right? Now let's look into our stream code, which is pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same, except that we're actually returning a stream this time instead of a future. Okay, because stream builders, by the name, it's expecting a stream. So over here, we've written db.collection write-ups.order by date created sending true dot snapshot. So what's the difference? Over here, we were using get, over here, using snapshots. Again, if it gets confusing as to what method is responsible for what, A, you can always read up the official documentation, and B, you can just use your keyboard shortcuts to pull up the documentation over there, and that will actually show you that, hey, this is returning a future and this is returning a string. Okay. In Windows, it's actually Control Q. I don't remember the shortcut in Mac. Okay. So that's it. That's all our query is doing, and we're actually doing all of the deserialization stuff over here. You can do that outside over there as well, but I've done it over here. Okay. So over here, we have connection state dot active. Now you might argue, well, what's the difference? I mean, over there we were using done, over here we're using active. Now, if you recall, future builders require that the query is executed just once. It's executed just once, then it's not executed again until and unless you go back and reopen the screen. Then obviously, because the build method is triggered, the query will be obviously re-executed. But in terms of Stream Builder, the query is executed once, but it's actively listening. So if you type in done over here, it will never go inside this block. In fact, it will always return this circular progress indicator because this connection state dot done will never be true. Okay, so it's just something that you need to know. So once the connection state is active, we will get right into it and we will see whether snapshot has data and the data is not empty. If it's not empty, then we'll do all of that deserialization that we were doing over there. We save that in a variable and we display it over here. Okay, so that's pretty much all that we have done here right now. And let me quickly show you one thing because we haven't really integrated a write query. I'll be doing it right after this short thing that I show you, okay? So as you can see over here, we have we have these three documents over here, okay? So let's just try to add up something manually. So we click on auto ID, the title, monkey Flutter, body, Flutter, Fire for beginners. This is so cool. Then we have date created, timestamp, let's say today, and save. So as you can see, we have added a new document over here, and you can see over here, we didn't do anything and it popped up automatically over here. So that's how stream builders work. On the contrary, if I was still here right now, obviously, because I switched tabs, which is why it re-triggered the build method, right? But if I were over here and if I stayed here and added a document, so let's say, in fact, let's try a delete operation, okay? So let's try deleting this document. And we'll see that it hasn't deleted. And in comparison, it has already deleted this from here. Okay, so this is the major difference between a stream builder and a feature builder and streams and features themselves. The reason why I spend so much time on this is because this is something that you actually end up actively using, whether you're creating a smaller level project or a bigger level project. You need to do a mix and match of both, along with state management practices, of course. So let's try writing a write query this time, okay? So let's head over to our db.dart. Let's try writing a query. Okay, so future void create entry and write up return bb dot collection write ups dot. Okay. So this is basically what this add method is basically responsible for writing to the database in a way that Firebase auto-generates the ID for you. Okay. So this is used for auto generation of ID, and as you can see, it's expecting a map this time. Okay. But if you look at our class over here, our class converts a map object to our custom class object, but it does not do vice versa. Okay, so what we can do is that we can create a method that actually does that for us. So let's do that. Map string dynamic to map. Oh, sorry. As you can see, I've done nothing special. I've just created an empty map that I'm going to return now. So we need to return the title, which would be title. We need to return the body, which is the body. And we need to return date created, which is date created. Okay, that's all we need to do. So now let's head over here and serialize it. Dot to map, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so in fact, yeah. Okay, cool. So this is pretty much it, right? Now what do we need to do is that we're gonna call it, right, of course. We will be calling this inside this new write file, which opens from here. Okay. So we already have our controllers in place, and we already have our controllers set to our text fields. And we just need to code this submit button now. Okay. So do we have okay, no. Let's do an import on services. Okay. If controller dot text is not empty, and body controller dot text oops, not empty, then we'll get right into it. We'll be creating an object of write-up class. Title would be a controller dot text, and body would be body controller dot text. And then date created would be datetime.now. Okay, so we have that, and now we just need to call on our database query. So we have DB service, DB service dot create entry, and then we have a write-up. In fact, let's do an additional thing. Let's see what it returns if we write then. Yep, it's returning us the document reference. So let's write that dot then document ref. And let's do print document ref dot ID. Yep. This is the document ID that I was initially referring to. And I guess we could do that. Okay, let's leave it at that right now. And let's just see whether it works standalone, and then obviously we'll pop everything, okay? So, okay. Let's create an await here. In fact, let's write an await here so that it waits for it to finish, and then we'll pop it, okay? I think we have everything set in place. We have our query where we're printing our document's ID upon success, and it's not returning anything. It's just returning a void. And over here we have this action set in place on our text button. So whenever this is pressed, okay. So let's do a quick hard reload. Quick hard restart. Okay. So we have these three things over here right now. Let's see if this thing works. Okay. Test entry. And giving a session on Flutter Fire for beginners. It's okay. So let's open up our console, see if anything gets printed, and let's hit submit. And as you can see, it barely took even 1 second, and it displayed this right over here. So that's usually how things work in Flutter Firebase. Okay. So we have seen what kind of queries we need to write when we're getting data from the database, aka read queries. We have seen how to write and add a query. And another thing that, like for instance, there was this thing that I was saying that if you want to create a document by a specific ID, that's something that I'm doing over here. I've just written this query. I haven't called it anywhere. So what this is doing is that if you compare these two, what's the difference? Over here, we have this add. Over here, we have this set. What set does is that you provide it with an ID using this doc, and then you provide the document ID there. And then you call the set function on it. So what the set function does is that based on the document ID that you've provided to it, it will actually create a document on that specific document ID, and it will not auto-generate the document ID as it currently is doing right now. Okay, so this usually comes in handy when you have authenticated a user. And when you authenticate a user, you always get a UID in return, okay? Now, once the user has been authenticated, he will be showing up under the authentication tab, but he will not be showing up in your database tab. And if you want to create a database entry for the user that you've just authenticated, then you need to add them separately using some form of queries like this one. So what this does is that you provide that UID, which you're getting from the authentication of that user. You say that, hey, you need to create this record on this UID, and the fields are this. And what this merge true does is that if, let's say currently you're just passing 3 parameters, and maybe at some other later point in time, maybe there's a screen called Edit Profile where the user can add their biography or an image. So those are two extra fields that you didn't cover previously, right? So what setting merge to true will do for you is that it will merge the old copy of the data with this new copy that you're sending. It will merge the true and it will basically append everything together. So if, let's say, based on the query that was called in edit profile, if the user has added his biography, if the user has changed their name as well, then what setting merge to true will do is that it will basically append that biography field in the document on Firebase. And the second thing that it will do is that instead of showing the old name, it will now be showing the new name that you have provided as a result of this query. Okay, so it merges the data and it comes in really handy, well, in really big applications when your data is being manipulated from so many different points, right? So this is how it works. I do want to do one authentication for you. Let's see if we can just do the basic one. Okay, so in order to use authentication, you obviously first need to go over to authentication and click on Get Started. Okay, by default, it will bring up this kind of page, and you can see that all of them are disabled by default. The simplest one is actually anonymous login because, yeah, you don't exactly need to do much over here. So let's see how this works. Whatever authentication mechanism that you want to use, you need to first enable it from Firebase. Otherwise, it will throw you an error if you have already written and called a query in your application. Okay, so we have enabled our anonymous login. And over here, as you can see, I am on the Flutter Files documentation page under Authentication tab. So over here, it has a bunch of different authentication mechanisms that you can use. The simplest one being anonymous sign-in, right? So to get started, call the sign-in anonymously method on the Firebase auth instance, and that's pretty much all you need to do. So let's do that. I already have my login screen. In fact, I think I might have to change my route. Okay, let's change our route. Okay, let's change this to splash screen. I don't have any UI coded on the splash screen. It's just for routing purposes. Okay, as you can see over here, check if user is logged in and route accordingly. So first and foremost, let's import Firebase auth, and then Firebase auth. If auth dot current user is not equal to null, we have an import for screens. No, we don't. Import screens. Search placement named context. Screen ID. Else. Okay, so what these lines of code will do is that because as you can see now, I have set this splash screen as the initial route, meaning that whenever the application is launched, this is the first screen that will be launched, and this is the first code that will be executed, right? So it'll be just executed just once because we've called it inside in its state, and it's pretty lightweight. especially because Firebase has upgraded, and previously it would return a user as a future. So you would have to call await and you'd have to basically do async synchronization management. But you don't need to do that right now. And it's just pretty useful. Okay. So what we're doing is that we have initialized our auth so that we can interact with Firebase authentication, and we're checking if there's any user that's currently logged in this application. If auth.current_user exists, is it's not null, then the user should be routed to the navigator screen. This is at the navigator screen. Okay, the navigator screen has these two tabs, and if the user is null, then he should be routed to the login screen. So let's stop our application and do a cold restart to see how it goes. If it routes properly, we will know that, okay, at least this thing is working properly. And then based on that, once we have successfully landed on our login screen, we will be doing an anonymous login over there so that you can see how it works. Just close a bunch of files here. Oh, okay. All right, there was a minor set state error, but no need, no issues. It's actually because we need to call that post binding thing before we are doing routing. Okay, it's just something that happens sometimes. If you were to Google this error, that set state was called during build or something like that, then you would get the solution that you need to enclose this inside widgets binding.post called frameback. Okay, because then that would wait for the UI, and then it would do the appropriate routing. Okay, then you wouldn't see the red screen of death. So this is our login screen over here, and we have this login. So we continue as guest. My God, what is this going on? Okay, let's try to see what's happening. Yeah, in fact, let's do fix this error. Okay. 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 So this is what we need to do. In fact, let's do this one. I think both would work, but yeah. Anyway. Um, where is our splash screen? Ah, here it is. Okay, the reason that I'm actually copy pasting errors into Google and doing these fixes right here in front of you guys is because so that you guys can get into the habit of actually reading through the errors and Googling them and then finding the appropriate answer and adding that fix in your code. Because I have worked with a lot of people, and there are so many people who just don't know how to Google. They don't know if an error is occurring, they'll be like, hey, we're getting this error. What does this mean? And I'll tell them to read through the error. What is the error actually saying? People don't usually do that, and errors are there for a reason. So you actually need to read through what the error says, and then you need to Google it and then obviously fix it accordingly. So as you can see, we didn't get that red screen of death. It looks completely fine. And here is our code for our continue as guest button. Okay. So we have this button over here, and as you can see, its implementation is currently empty. So what we will be doing is that base auth, oh, it's not imported. No worries. Base auth dot instance. Let's import it. Okay. And then
Hello, Miss. Sorry to interrupt, but since we have the Flutter talk in a bit, I'd like to ask if you can wrap it up in a bit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, sure, no issues. It's actually just one line of code that we'll be looking at now. Okay, so this is just one line of code that we need to add, which will pretty much take care of everything. Um, okay, so what this line is currently doing is that, okay, okay, so this is literally the entire method which will take care of logging you in as a guest, meaning no specific things will be connected to you as a credential. You will just be provided with an auto-generated user ID, and that's pretty much everything. You'll be logged in as a guest to the application. So let's see how this goes. If user credential dot user is not equal to null, print user credential dot dot UID, and also print user dot is anonymous. So this will actually tell you whether you're currently logged in as an anonymous user or not, and it comes in pretty handy later on. Anyway, so that is done. Navigator.push replacement named. Um, And yeah, I think that's all we need to do in place. So we have our sign in anonymously method called over here. We have a wait over here, so it'll wait for this method to be called. And once it has successfully called, it will be printing these two values on our console, and then it will be rerouting us to the, oops, not the splash screen, the navigator screen that I did. Okay. So let's see how this works. We are doing a hard restart. Let's click on continue as guest. And as you can see, we have been logged in. And if you can see over here, this is our ID. This is saying true because we're logged in as an anonymous user right now. And if we head over to the users tab over here, we can see that there's an anonymous user with this ID created over here. So I think that's pretty much it from my side. I will be sharing this repository with you guys in a while after the session. And if you have absolutely any questions, feel free to ask me right now. And I'm active on my LinkedIn and Twitter. You can easily get a hold of me on either of those platforms. Let me know if you have absolutely any questions, and I look forward to answering them. And I really sincerely hope that you enjoyed this process and took away something and understood some aspects of Firebase and how it works. If we wouldn't have run into those technical difficulties earlier on, I would have actually showed you email password authentication with sign up, login, and yeah, basically all that fancy stuff. So yeah.
All right. So, thank you, Miss Sakina, for that talk, and thank you to all of our guests for bearing with us with through all those difficulties earlier. Yeah. So,
Thanks. I'm glad you guys
all right.
enjoyed it.
So, uh, All right. So for our guests, you may also join our Discord, and you can also ask questions there on all topics, not just with Ms. Akina's topic, but even with our past speakers' topics. So we're about to start also with our Flutter talk. It's still going to be streamed on DSC Philippines, so be sure to check it out. All right. Cool. All right. So see you guys there. Bye bye. Thank you, Ms. Akina.